The sea was calm, but beneath its silence burned a storm of courage. Dozens of boats, small and fragile against the vastness of the Mediterranean, carried men and women who were not soldiers, not politicians, not armed with weapons of war. They were ordinary people from different corners of the world: doctors, teachers, students, activists, even elderly volunteers brought together by a single idea: to break the silence of Gaza's suffering. Their mission was not just about aid, it was about defiance, about hope, about showing the world that humanity cannot be blockaded. Every journey begins with a choice, and their choice was dangerous. They knew that sailing toward Gaza meant confronting the Israeli blockade, a naval wall that had for years kept the tiny strip of land isolated from the rest of the world. They knew that Israeli drones would circle above them, that warships would follow, that threats would come through the radio telling them to turn back. But these volunteers were not turning back. Their hearts were anchored in a simple belief that people in Gaza deserved bread, medicine, and dignity just like anyone else. On the docks before departure, the atmosphere was unlike anything the world usually sees. Flags of different countries waved, banners called for freedom, and volunteers embraced one another as if they might not see each other again. Cameras flashed, journalists recorded statements, and families stood with tears in their eyes, watching their loved ones step aboard small ships that looked far too fragile to challenge a mighty blockade. Yet for the volunteers, fragility was not weakness, it was strength. They wanted to show that humanity's willpower, even in small boats, could sail against fear. The first night at sea was heavy with anticipation. Some volunteers sat on the deck staring at the horizon, whispering prayers into the wind. Others shared their stories, why they had come, what they hoped to achieve. A young woman from Spain said she had joined because she could not bear to watch children in Gaza grow up under bombs without ever tasting freedom. An old man from Turkey said he wanted his grandchildren to know that he had stood for something bigger than himself. A doctor from the UK carried boxes of medical supplies and said he didn't care if he was arrested, as long as those supplies reached someone in need. Each voice carried a fire, and together they became a chorus of resistance. As the sun rose the next day, the sea glimmered gold, and hope seemed alive. The boats moved slowly, sails stretched, engines humming, every wave pushing them closer to their destiny. But hope was not without fear. The radio crackled with warnings. Voices, stern and commanding, told them they were entering restricted waters, that they must turn back or face consequences. Yet no one turned. The captains adjusted their course, the volunteers tightened their grips on the rails, and together they pressed forward. The world had begun to watch. News outlets reported the flotilla's progress. Social media spread images of the boats draped in banners of peace. People in Gaza, cut off from the outside world, heard whispers of the mission and gathered on the shore, scanning the horizon, waiting for the first glimpse of boats that carried not weapons but hope. For them, these volunteers were not strangers, they were lifelines. But the closer the flotilla sailed, the more dangerous the journey became. Israeli drones buzzed overhead like mechanical vultures. Warships began to shadow them from a distance, gray silhouettes against the horizon, a reminder of the power waiting to crush them. The volunteers could feel eyes watching, measuring their every move. Yet they sang songs, chanted slogans, and raised their fists toward the sky. Fear was present, but courage was louder. The second night brought storms. Waves crashed against the hulls, and winds howled like angry spirits. Some volunteers vomited from seasickness, others shivered in wet clothes, but none lost their resolve. In the darkness, lightning illuminated their faces that carried both exhaustion and determination. A young activist recorded a video, saying, "If you are watching this, know that we are not afraid. Even if we are stopped, the world will remember that we tried." Her words, carried by the storm, became a promise. When dawn broke again, the flotilla was battered but unbroken. One of the boats had suffered engine trouble, and another leaked water from the relentless waves. But the crews worked together, pumping out water, repairing with whatever tools they had, refusing to abandon anyone. This unity, this refusal to leave even a single boat behind, was what made them stronger than the blockade. They were not just individuals, they were a collective heart beating against injustice. As they pressed closer to Gaza, Israeli warships finally revealed themselves in full force. Dark, towering machines of war against small, fragile boats of peace. The contrast was brutal, almost surreal. Through loudspeakers, the warnings grew harsher: turn back immediately. You are violating international waters. If you proceed, you will be stopped by force. The volunteers stood on deck, hands clasped, banners raised high. We sail for freedom. Cameras rolled, live streams broadcasted, and the world watched the standoff unfold. Then came the drones. Small buzzing machines swooped low, their presence menacing, their cameras capturing every detail. One drone released a flare, lighting the sky with a warning. Another passed so close that the volunteers could feel the rush of air. Yet still they sailed. They knew that every second they remained at sea, the world's eyes were on them, and Israel's blockade was being questioned. In Gaza, thousands had gathered on the shore, chanting, waving flags, holding signs that read "Welcome" and "Thank you." Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, pointing at the horizon, asking when the boats would appear. Mothers prayed aloud, their voices trembling, hoping that the medicine, the food, and the love carried across the sea would reach their families. But the mission was not so simple. The blockade was ruthless, and the Israeli Navy was determined. Radio messages grew more aggressive, warning of interception, arrest, and seizure. Some volunteers trembled, some cried, but none surrendered. One captain, his voice firm and steady, replied on the radio, "We are unarmed. We carry no weapons. We carry only aid. If you stop us, you stop humanity itself." The tension was unbearable. Every minute felt like an hour. Every wave carried uncertainty. Would the Navy strike? Would the drones attack? Would the boats be boarded? No one knew. But the volunteers kept moving forward, driven by something far stronger than fear, the belief that Gaza's children deserved a future. And so the mission continued, fragile boats cutting through waves, surrounded by power but unshaken in spirit. This was not just a journey across the sea, it was a journey into history, a journey that Israel did not want the world to see, a mission born from humanity's deepest strength, the refusal to remain silent in the face of suffering. The horizon still lay ahead, the outcome uncertain, but the message was already clear. These boats, these people, these fragile sails carried something no blockade could stop: hope. The flotilla pushed forward, its sails stretched thin against the endless Mediterranean wind. Every mile closer to Gaza felt like a victory, yet every mile also carried heavier danger. By now, the volunteers had little doubt that interception was inevitable. Still, their spirits burned brighter than the sun rising behind them. These were people who had already accepted the cost of their choice. They had left their homes, their families, their safety far behind. What they carried with them was something far greater: dignity, humanity, and the courage to face whatever awaited them at sea. On the deck of the lead boat, a young activist from France raised a camera and spoke into the lens. "We are not afraid. If they stop us, the world will see. If they attack us, the world will remember. Gaza is not alone. Humanity is not silent." Her words were carried live to thousands watching online, spreading across continents, igniting hashtags, headlines, and debates. Suddenly, the flotilla was not just a collection of boats, it was a global event. Everywhere, people watched. In Europe, protests erupted in solidarity, demanding that governments protect the mission. In Asia, communities gathered in mosques, churches, and town squares to pray for the volunteers' safety. In Latin America, activists painted murals of boats sailing through stormy seas, symbols of resistance and hope. The flotilla had become more than a voyage, it had become a movement, a living story of courage that transcended borders, but not everyone welcomed it. Israeli media declared the flotilla a provocation, a threat to national security. Officials accused the volunteers of being agitators, not humanitarians. Naval commanders vowed that the blockade would not be broken no matter who stood in their way. For Israel, allowing these boats to reach Gaza meant weakness, an open door for defiance. For the volunteers, it meant life or death for families trapped behind walls of steel and concrete. The collision of these two truths was unavoidable. The volunteers felt the pressure in every heartbeat. That night, they gathered on the deck under the stars, holding hands, singing softly, whispering prayers. The sea around them was calm, almost deceptive, as if it too held its breath for what was about to happen. A Turkish volunteer pulled out a guitar, strumming a simple melody that carried into the night. Others joined, voices weaving together into a chorus that said without words, "We are one." The unity gave them strength. They reminded each other why they were there, not for fame, not for politics, but for children who had never seen an open sky without drones. For families who built homes only to see them destroyed. For patients waiting in overcrowded hospitals where medicine had run dry. Each volunteer carried faces in their mind, stories in their heart, and it was these invisible passengers that pushed them forward through fear. At dawn, the shadow of power arrived. Israeli warships drew closer, their engines roaring, slicing through waves like steel predators. The volunteers could now see them clearly, gray hulls bristling with antennas, cannons, and soldiers. The sight was overwhelming, almost surreal: tiny boats of peace surrounded by giants of war. The contrast was so sharp it burned itself into memory. Through loudspeakers the demands came again: "You are entering restricted waters. Turn back immediately or you will be boarded." The volunteers responded with chants, raising banners high: "We sail for Gaza. We bring hope, not war. Humanity cannot be blockaded." Cameras caught every second, broadcasting live, ensuring the world bore witness. Tension electrified the air. Some volunteers trembled, others clenched their fists in defiance. The captains radioed back, "We are unarmed. We carry only humanitarian aid. We will not turn back." Their voices were steady even as warships loomed just meters away. Suddenly the drones returned, buzzing overhead like hornets. One swooped low, snapping photographs. Another dropped flares, exploding in the sky as warnings. The noise was deafening, the heat intense, yet the volunteers stood their ground, faces lit by the flames above them. To retreat now would mean betraying everything they had risked. To move forward meant defiance. Then came the boarding. Armed soldiers descended from helicopters, sliding down ropes, landing on decks with weapons drawn. Others leaped from speedboats, shouting commands, surrounding the volunteers in seconds. The air was chaos shouts in different languages, the clatter of boots, the cries of volunteers linking arms in resistance. "We are peaceful," they shouted. "We are unarmed." But the soldiers pushed forward, tearing down banners, smashing cameras, and forcing captains away from their wheels. For the volunteers, every second was agony. They had prepared for this moment, yet nothing could prepare them for the reality of it. Guns pointed at faces, hands pulled behind backs, bodies thrown to the deck. Some volunteers tried to shield boxes of aid with their own bodies, refusing to let go until soldiers dragged them away. The clash was violent not because the volunteers fought with weapons, but because they refused to surrender their dignity. Across the world, live streams cut suddenly to black. Social media erupted with outrage. Headlines screamed, "Flotilla seized," "Volunteers arrested," "Israel storms aid ships," protests flared in capitals. Governments demanded explanations. The mission, once small boats on a vast sea, had now become a storm that no blockade could contain. The volunteers, handcuffed and blindfolded, were transported to naval bases. Some were beaten, some injured, all exhausted. Yet even in captivity, their spirits were not broken. One whispered to another, "They can stop our boats, but not our message." Another murmured, "Remember, the world is watching." In Gaza, the disappointment was crushing. Thousands who had gathered on the shore watched the horizon until night fell, waiting for boats that never arrived. Mothers cried, children asked questions their parents could not answer, fathers clenched their fists in silence. Yet even in heartbreak, gratitude flowed. "They tried for us," a man said. "They risked everything for us." That is victory already. Back in the cells, volunteers endured interrogation. They were asked why they came, who sent them, what they hoped to achieve. Their answers were simple. "We came because people are suffering. We came because silence is complicity. We came because Gaza is not alone." Every answer was a knife against oppression, every word a refusal to bow. Days turned into a blur. Some volunteers were deported, sent back to their home countries with warnings never to return. Others faced trials, legal charges, and accusations, but none regretted their choice. In press conferences after their release, they told the world what had happened: the boarding, the arrests, the violence, and in their voices, there was no regret on their pride. "The mission may not have reached Gaza," one said, "but it reached the world. They tried to silence us," another said, "but instead, they amplified us." "This is not the end," a third declared. "It is only the beginning." Indeed, the flotilla had ignited something larger than itself. New volunteers pledged to sail again. More organizations raised funds, built networks, and promised future missions. Artists created songs, filmmakers shot documentaries, writers filled pages with stories of courage at sea. What had begun as fragile boats carrying aid had transformed into a wave of global resistance, one that no blockade could fully contain. And in Gaza, the people remembered. Children drew pictures of boats on their school walls. Families spoke of the volunteers as heroes, proof that the world had not completely abandoned them. Hope had not reached their shores in boxes, but it had reached their hearts and spirit. And sometimes, spirit is even more powerful than supplies. Because the mission was never just about what the boats carried, it was about what they represented. They represented humanity refusing to turn away. They represented courage in the face of overwhelming power. They represented the truth Israel did not want the world to see. The flotilla had been stopped, but its story sailed on unstoppable, carried in the voices of those who had witnessed it, those who had supported it, and those who would join it in the future. And so, the sea remained restless, waiting for the next wave, the next boats, the next group of ordinary people who would choose to do something extraordinary. Because as long as Gaza remained blockaded, as long as children grew up under siege, there would always be those willing to risk everything to carry hope across the waves. This was not the end, it was only the second chapter. The mission was far from over. The story of the flotilla did not end on the sea. It began there, yes, with sails stretched against the wind and banners lifted against fear. But once the boats were seized, once the volunteers were dragged away, the mission took on a new life, one Israel could not control, one the world could not ignore. The mission Israel didn't want you to see was now everywhere. In headlines, in protests, in the whispers of children who asked their parents why strangers had risked everything for them. For the volunteers, freedom came in fragments. Some were deported after days of interrogation, still bruised, still exhausted, but unbroken. They returned to airports where crowds waited with flowers, applause, and chants of solidarity. Cameras flashed as they spoke into microphones. We saw the blockade with our own eyes. We felt the violence of those who want Gaza silent, but we also felt the strength of humanity that refuses to bow. Their words were broadcast across television screens, shared across social media, printed on the front pages of newspapers. Others were held longer, charged with fabricated crimes, accused of being spies, agitators, even terrorists. Yet, even inside the cold walls of detention, they refused to change their story. They wrote letters to the outside world. smuggled messages of hope, and every word carried the same refrain. We sailed for humanity, not politics. We carried aid, not weapons. We carried love, not hate. Their captors could not erase the truth, no matter how hard they tried. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the people did not forget. They mourned the supplies that never reached their hands, but they celebrated the spirit that reached their hearts. On the beaches where families had waited for the boats, children drew ships in the sand, carving names they had heard, names of volunteers who had sailed across the sea for them. Teachers told the story in classrooms, reminding students that they were not invisible, that strangers across the world had chosen to fight for their dignity. For a people so often silenced, the flotilla was a voice that thundered louder than bombs. And so the mission grew larger than itself. In cities across the globe, movements rose. Protesters carried cardboard boats through streets, chanting "Free Gaza." Artists painted murals of waves breaking chains. Musicians composed songs of the sea, lyrics filled with courage and resistance. Every culture found its own way to honor the story, and in doing so, the flotilla became more than an event, it became a symbol. Israel, in its attempt to crush the mission, had instead magnified it. By storming the boats, by silencing cameras, by arresting volunteers, they had proven the very truth the flotilla wanted to show, that the blockade was real, that freedom was denied, that humanity itself was under siege. The harder they tried to erase the mission, the deeper it carved itself into history. For the volunteers, life after the flotilla was forever changed. Many returned home but could no longer return to ordinary life. They had seen too much, felt too much, risked too much. They became speakers, advocates, organizers of new missions. "The sea is not finished with us," one said. "We will sail again," another declared. "Every time they stop us, we will come back stronger, because hope cannot be sunk." And sail again they did. New flotillas were planned, new boats prepared, new volunteers signed up. Each mission carried the memory of the first, the lessons of danger, the scars of violence, but also the unbreakable spirit of defiance. Governments tried to discourage them, critics mocked them, enemies threatened them, but none of it mattered. For those who had once looked into the eyes of soldiers and refused to surrender, fear had lost its power. The sea became a stage of resistance, and every voyage was a new chapter in a story the world could not look away from. The volunteers knew they might not succeed in delivering aid every time, but success was not measured only in boxes of medicine or bags of food. It was measured in the awareness they spread, the solidarity they built, the hope they ignited. And by that measure, the flotilla was unstoppable. But the mission was not just about politics or protest, it was about humanity. It was about the simple truth that no child deserves to grow up hungry. No patient deserves to die for lack of medicine. No people deserve to be caged behind walls and blockades. It was about the belief that compassion should not be a crime, that sailing with aid should not be treated as war. These truths, carried across the waves, reached deeper than any blockade ever could. For the world, the flotilla forced a choice, to look away or to bear witness. Many chose to look, and once they looked, they could not forget. Images of soldiers storming aid ships haunted them. Stories of volunteers risking their lives inspired them. The mission sparked conversations in parliaments, debates in universities, sermons in mosques and churches. It shook the conscience of humanity, and once awakened, conscience does not sleep easily. Years may pass, but the story of that flotilla will not fade. It will be told in documentaries, written in books, taught in schools, remembered in families who still wait for freedom. It will live in the hearts of those who know that even in the darkest times, there were people who chose to sail for hope. And it will remind future generations that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. Because that is what the volunteers did. They faced fear, they faced power, they faced violence, and yet they did not turn back. Their boats may have been seized, their bodies chained, their mission interrupted, but their message was immortal. Gaza is not alone. Humanity will not be silent. The blockade cannot cage the human spirit. And so, when you hear the words, "the mission Israel didn't want you to see," remember what it means. It means the world was not supposed to know that ordinary people dared to challenge warships with fishing boats. It means you were not supposed to see banners of peace torn down by soldiers. It means you were not supposed to hear the voices of volunteers saying, "We bring hope, not hate." But you did see, you did hear. The truth slipped through the cracks of censorship and reached you, and once seen it cannot be unseen. The sea is wide, the blockade is strong, and the struggle is far from over. But the flotilla proved something powerful, that walls may block borders, but they cannot block courage. That chains may bind hands, but they cannot bind hearts. That fear may silence voices, but it cannot silence truth. Someday, perhaps, the sea will be open, the blockade lifted, and Gaza free. And when that day comes, the people will remember not just the politicians or the treaties, but the volunteers who sailed fragile boats into danger simply because they believed in humanity. Their names may not all be known, their faces may not all be remembered, but their courage will live forever in the waves they left behind. And so the mission continues not only in boats at sea, but in the hearts of all who carry the belief that no injustice lasts forever. that no blockade is permanent, that freedom always finds a way. The mission is not over. It sails on in you, in me, in everyone who refuses to look away. This is the mission Israel didn't want you to see, and now that you've seen it, you are part of the story too.